On the morning of January 8, 2004, a man in San Antonio, Texas, wrapped a chain around a factory gate and clicked a padlock shut. Behind that gate sat a sign bearing one of the most famous names in the history of American business. And in that small, ordinary sound, a metal click on a cold Texas morning, something ended that had lasted 150 years. For a century and a half, without a single interruption, Levi's blue jeans had been made in America. Through a gold rush, through an earthquake that burned an entire city, through 2 world wars, a depression, and the rise and fall of the American factory itself. 3.5 billion pairs. And now it was over. But here's what almost nobody standing outside that gate knew. The man whose name was on the sign never made a pair of jeans in his life. He never invented them. He almost certainly never wore them. The real inventor was a tailor in Reno, Nevada, whose name has nearly vanished from history, and the whole empire began with a woman walking into a shop with $3 and a problem. This is the story of how America's most famous pants were born in the wrong city, named after the wrong man, and how, 130 years later, the country that made them stopped making them at all. To understand what died behind that gate in Texas, you have to go back to December of 1870, to a wooden storefront on Virginia Street in Reno, Nevada. Reno was barely 2 years old. The Transcontinental Railroad had just punched through, and the town was full of men who destroyed clothing for a living. Miners, teamsters, railroad laborers. Inside that storefront worked Jacob Davis.
He had been born Jacob Eufus in Riga, on the far edge of the Russian Empire, and had crossed an ocean and a continent to end up sewing tents, wagon covers, and horse blankets for railroad crews. He bought his fabric, heavy cotton duck, and a sturdy blue cloth called denim, from a dry goods wholesaler 4 days away in San Francisco. One December day, a woman came through his door. She was the wife of a local laborer, and her name is lost to history. Her husband, she explained, was enormous, and he went through work pants faster than she could patch them. The pockets tore first. They always tore first. She put $3 on the counter and asked Davis to make something that would survive her husband. Davis cut the pants from heavy cloth, and then, looking around his shop, his eyes landed on something he used every day for horse blankets: copper rivets. On an impulse he would later describe under oath in a courtroom, he hammered rivets into the corners of the pockets, right where the seams always gave way. The pants refused to die. The laborer wore them. Then his friends wanted a pair. Then their friends. Within months, Jacob Davis was drowning in orders for riveted pants, and every railroad man from Reno to Virginia City seemed to know his name. He had stumbled onto something enormous, and he knew it. He also knew something else. The moment anyone saw those rivets, they could copy them. There was only one way to protect the idea: a patent. And here the story turns on a detail so small it almost hurts. Jacob Davis could not afford the paperwork. The story goes that the fees came to about $68, and the tailor simply did not have it. So in the summer of 1872, Davis did the only thing he could think of. He wrote a letter to the man who sold him his fabric, a San Francisco merchant he had never gone into business with, but whose invoices he knew by heart. He described the rivets, told him the pants were selling faster than he could make them, and made an offer. Pay for the patent, and we split the invention, half and half. The merchant's name was Levi Strauss. Now, if you think you know who Levi Strauss was, hold that thought, because the man behind the name is not the man on the label. He was born Levi Strauss in a stone house in Bavaria, the son of a Jewish peddler. He landed in America as a teenager, and in 1853 he sailed into San Francisco to open the West Coast branch of his family's dry goods business. He sold fabric, blankets, buttons, and clothing to the small stores springing up across Gold Country. The legend says he made his first pants out of tent canvas for miners in the 1850s. It is a wonderful story. It is also, almost certainly, just a story, and we will get to the strange reason why nobody can prove it one way or the other. What the records do show is simpler. Levi Strauss was not a tailor. He was not an inventor. He was a wholesaler, a supplier, a man who moved goods. In 20 years in California, he had never manufactured anything. But he could read a letter, and the letter from Reno described a product that sold itself. Strauss agreed to pay for the patent, and on May 20, 1873, United States Patent number 139121 was issued jointly to Jacob W. Davis and Levi Strauss & Company.
Read the patent today and you will notice something remarkable. It is not a patent for pants. It is titled An Improvement in Fastening Pocket Openings. The most successful garment in human history is built on a patent for a rivet.
That same year, Davis closed his shop in Reno and moved his family to San Francisco to run production for his new partner. And he added one more touch of genius. On the back pockets, he sewed a double arc of orange thread, purely so that his pants could be recognized across a street. It meant nothing. It protected nothing. It was a signature in thread, decades before anyone used the word logo, and it is still on every pair today. It would become one of the oldest apparel trademarks in America. They called the product waist overalls. Nobody would call them jeans for another lifetime. At first, seamstresses sewed them at home. Then came a real factory, with Davis walking the floor. The pants spread through the West the way the railroad had, carried on the bodies of the men building the country. In 1886, the company stitched a leather patch onto the waistband, showing two horses trying and failing to rip a pair apart. That was the entire promise of the product, drawn as a picture for customers who could not read. Around 1890, the patent expired, the rivets became fair game for every competitor, and the company began assigning lot numbers to its products. The riveted waist overall, the original, the flagship, received the number 501. Why 501? Hold that question, because the answer, or rather the reason there is no answer, is coming, and it arrives with fire. Levi Strauss died in 1902, a millionaire and one of San Francisco's great philanthropists, a man who had funded orphanages and university scholarships. He had no children. The business passed to his 4 nephews, and by most accounts, the man whose name was stitched onto the toughest work pants in America never wore a pair. He was a merchant of standing, and waist overalls were for laborers.
The company itself has admitted as much. The most famous name in denim probably went his whole life without putting on his own product. 4 years after his death, at 12 minutes past 5 in the morning, on April 18, 1906, the ground under San Francisco tore open. The earthquake and the firestorm that followed destroyed the heart of the city, and with it, the headquarters and factories of Levi Strauss & Company. The buildings could be rebuilt, and they were, with the company famously continuing to pay its workers while the ashes cooled and a new plant rose on Valencia Street that same year. But something else burned in 1906 that could never be rebuilt: the records. The ledgers, the correspondence, the order books, virtually every document from the company's first half-century turned to smoke. This is why nobody can prove the minor legend. And this is why, to this day, nobody on Earth, not even the company itself, knows why the 501 is called the 501. The reason existed, it was written down somewhere, and it burned. The best-selling garment in history wears a serial number whose meaning was destroyed 120 years ago. The Valencia Street factory that rose from those ashes would sew jeans for 96 years. Remember it. We will stand in front of it again before this story is over. Jacob Davis ran manufacturing until his death in 1908, and then the inventor quietly slipped out of the story. The pants he created in an afternoon kept going without him. Hollywood put them on cowboys, and suddenly the riveted pant was not workwear, it was the American West made wearable. In 1936, the company sewed a small red tab beside the back pocket, because even across a rodeo arena,
Davis's orange arcs and that red tab, 2 of the smallest details in fashion, and 2 of the most valuable. Then came the war, and the war changed who wore them. As millions of men shipped out, millions of women walked onto factory floors, into shipyards and aircraft plants, and they went to work in denim. The riveted pant, invented for a Nevada laborer, became the working uniform of the American home front. There is a reason the most famous image of a woman war worker has her sleeves rolled over work clothes. Denim stopped being clothing for a certain kind of man and became clothing for anyone who worked. And after the war, it became something stranger. Teenagers pulled on jeans precisely because their parents saw them as work clothes. Movie stars wore them slouched against fenders, and some American schools actually banned denim as a symbol of rebellion, which of course is the single most effective advertising any garment has ever received. The waist overall had a new name now: jeans. By the 1960s, a pair of 501s had found its way into the Smithsonian, and behind the Iron Curtain, stories tell of American jeans trading on the black market for a month's wages. Soviet teenagers were risking arrest for a product invented to survive a Nevada railroad worker.
Think about what had happened. A $3 solution to torn pockets had become, arguably, the most recognizable object America ever produced. Not the car, not the camera, not the lighter, the pant. And every pair of it, for 100 years, was made in America, in a web of factories that stretched from that plant on Valencia Street across the South and the Southwest. El Paso alone had 8 Levi's plants. In San Antonio, a single factory turned out more than 4 million pairs a year. Thousands of workers, most of them women, many of them spending 20, 30 years at the same machine. Sewing was hard, repetitive, honest work, and at Levi's it came with wages of $10, $12, $18 an hour, 4 weeks of paid vacation, family medical coverage for $24 a week. On those factory floors, workers did not say they had a job. They said they had Levi's, and they meant it the way you mean family. In 1996, the company hit its summit. $7.1 billion in sales, 37,000 employees around the world. The 501 was a global icon, the red tab was recognized on every continent, and the name of a Bavarian dry goods merchant was, by any measure, one of the most famous names alive. The collapse took 7 years. Actually, that is not quite true. The collapse took 7 years to become visible. The warning had come earlier, and it had come, of all places, in San Antonio. In January of 1990, the company closed a plant on the city's south side without notice. 1,100 seamstresses, most of them Mexican-American women, some with decades at their machines, arrived to find their jobs moving to Costa Rica. The workers did not go quietly.
They formed a group called Fuerza Unida, United Force, and for years they picketed the company's San Francisco headquarters, staged sit-ins, even hunger strikes. Newspapers covered it, the company weathered it, and the arithmetic that had closed that one plant did not go away. It grew. Because here was the problem no one at headquarters could solve. The entire meaning of the product, toughness, permanence, America itself, had been sewn into it by American hands at American wages. And by the 1990s, a pair of jeans sewn overseas cost a fraction of a pair sewn in Texas. Competitors had already left. Department stores were selling their own house brand jeans for half the price. Teenagers, the customers who had made Levi's a religion in the 50s, were drifting to newer labels. Sales began to slide in 1997, and then they slid every single year after that. And the company had chosen the worst possible moment to run out of room. In February 1996, at the very peak, the founding family had taken on billions in debt to buy out relatives and consolidate control. When revenue was $7 billion, that debt was manageable. As sales fell toward $4 billion, it became a clock ticking in every boardroom conversation. So the factories began to close, not one at a time, but in waves. The 8 plants in El Paso, Brownsville, the Rio Grande Valley, one of the poorest corners of the United States. Each closure was announced with the same careful language, and each one bought the company a little more time. By the early 2000s, the workforce had fallen from 37,000 toward 12,000, and the map of American Levi's plants had...
The San Francisco plant that had risen from the ashes of the 1906 earthquake, the factory that had answered the worst morning in the city's history with the sound of sewing machines, shut its doors after 96 years. If there was a moment the ending became inevitable, it was that one. The company that had rebuilt through an apocalypse could not sew its way through a spreadsheet. That left Texas, 2 plants in San Antonio, and nothing else. Roughly 800 workers were all that remained of American Levi's manufacturing, and everyone on those floors could read a newspaper. In September of 2003, the announcement came. The last 2 plants would close. The company called it a delayed but unavoidable decision and said plainly that it could not stay competitive and survive otherwise. Its own chief executive told reporters that consumers no longer found it gut-wrenching to buy products made abroad. For the women on the sewing floor, gut-wrenching was exactly the word. One of them was Clara Flores, 24 years at the plant, a hem sewer, $18 an hour, president of her union local. She told reporters she had once believed she held the most solid job in America because she did not just make blue jeans, she made the original. And now the original was leaving. The sewing stopped around Thanksgiving of 2003. Think about that timing for a moment. Somewhere on a San Antonio production line, in the last week of November, a worker guided a final inseam under a needle, snipped a thread, and became the last person to sew a mass-produced pair of Levi's on American soil, ending a chain of hands that ran back, stitch by stitch, 130 years to Jacob Davis's shop in Reno.
We do not know her name, just as we do not know the name of the woman who started it all with $3 on a counter. The story of these pants is bracketed by two anonymous women, one who asked for them and one who finished them. The machines fell silent, but the plant had one task left. For a few more weeks, San Antonio kept laundering, washing, and finishing jeans, softening denim that would never again be cut or sewn there. The last work American hands did on American Levi's was washing them. Then, in December, even the water stopped. On January 8, 2004, the company made it official. The gates were locked. 800 jobs gone. Severance checks of 2 weeks' pay for every year served, and 150 years of history closed with a chain. Viola Casares, who had been laid off in the first San Antonio closure back in 1990 and had spent 14 years fighting the tide, told a reporter that day that she felt like she was in mourning. "We used to be like a family," she said. "It was hard to believe it was final." Within months, the Canadian plants closed too, and there was no longer a single pair of mass-market Levi's made anywhere in North America. The work scattered to contractors across dozens of countries. The jeans did not disappear. The company survived, eventually recovered, eventually thrived again. You can buy a pair of 501s today in almost any city on Earth. Years later, the company would even bring back small, expensive runs sewn in Los Angeles, a few thousand pairs stitched in the country that once made $4 million a year in a single building. But the era, the unbroken American thread, ended behind that Texas gate. So what remains? Pick up a pair of 501s, any pair, made anywhere.
There is a copper rivet there. Its size, its placement, its entire reason for existing are the same as the rivets a Latvian tailor hammered into a laborer's pants in Reno in 1870, the same rivets described in patent number 139121, a patent not for jeans, not for fashion, not for an icon, but for an improvement in fastening pocket openings. Empires rose and fell around that rivet. A city burned around it. 100,000 careers were built and lost around it. The rivet never changed. Jacob Davis, the man who actually invented the most successful garment in history, has no product named after him, and most people who wear his invention every day have never heard his name. Levi Strauss, who by most accounts never wore the pants and certainly never sewed one, became one of the most spoken names on the planet. History, like denim, does not distribute its wear evenly. And in San Antonio, the gate is still there. The morning they locked it, the sign behind the chain link still carried that famous name, and somewhere inside, the last American-made Levi's sat folded, washed and finished, waiting to be shipped into a world that would keep buying them without ever quite knowing what it had stopped making. 150 years earlier, a young Bavarian immigrant had sailed into San Francisco with a stock of dry goods and no idea that a tailor he had never met would one day mail him immortality for $68. It began with a stranger's letter. It ended with a padlock. And in between, America got dressed.